Good day. My name is Ben Bartlett, and I am going to be talking about in this podcast of mine, which I am doing the first time as of speaking, which my topic for this special podcast broadcast will be about Monopoly inside a Hollywood studio system. And do forgive me for pausing for each moment, but sometimes I could be stuttering and I'm doing my best. I tried. To get things started, as long as I could remember, I always loved movies. Sometimes when I was a kid, like in kindergarten or something, I could only speak in cartoon or movie quotes, which nobody has a problem with. I do love watching movies, and any kind. That's why I took telecommunications as my major in Ball State University in the first place. But an interesting fact is, we begin to wonder many other recent purchases that they have been going on in the Hollywood system, such as AT&T had purchased Warner Media, or Walt Disney Company had recently purchased Fox Entertainment Group, after the rumors that went around for months on social media. And now, recently, in early December of 2019, is Viacom and CBS Corporation have merged together to become Viacom CBS Corporation. That means, I guess two corporations who are facing some economic trouble just merged together. But mostly, all that looks like it's sort of like a term or a game of Monopoly, which in history for this Monopoly game, it was created by a anti-monopolist. And as I read from the New York Times article entitled "Monopoly's Inventor, the Progressive Who Didn't Pass Go," mainly it was invented by a person. And let me see. I believe it's invented by an anti-monopolist named oh crap. Yes. It was mainly created by Elizabeth Maggie Phillips, who was she created this game because she filed a claim for her landlord's game in mainly she lived in a highly unusual life. Unlike most women of her area, she supported herself and didn't marry until the advanced age of 44. And by the time she had spent her leisure time, that is when she created the board game that was an expression of her strongly held political beliefs against the whole monopoly system. And that is when, in 1903, more than 3 decades before Parker's began manufacturing Monopoly, she designed the game as a protest against the big monopolists of her time, people like Andrew Carnegie and John Rockefeller. Apologies. But I guess to define the term of monopoly, it is not a definition of it is a game board. As I looked it up in a dictionary, it is an exclusive ownership through legal privilege, command of supply, or concerned action. So in economic terms, it is also a system that some businesses could have some ownership in any other business that can help them make more money. And for our creator of the game Monopoly, like it says, it's her protest game. But in the history of the whole monopoly in our country, it started all the way from the following of the American Civil War. There was a rapid increase in the exploitation of natural resources and industrial development in the United States. Few laws, however, regulated competition, and few taxes were levied on profits. Major businesses to form trust or monopolies, large companies that consolidated their market position by eliminating competition. So in other words, our government did anything they can to avoid any competitions. However, as we progressed, throughout the late 20th century and the early 21st century, monophonistic behavior clearly remained as a factor of the United States economic life, even though back then it did cause the Great Depression. One of the first person that I have interviewed, or one of the people that I have interviewed that I'm gonna put the recording on what they had to say of all the questions I have asked them. Here's all the answers that they have answered for me. And this person was like to be known as one of the professors from the telecommunications department named Dom Caristi.
Well, Fox made a decision of what business they were going to be in. And they decided they were not going to be in the motion picture industry. They decided that was not their future. They decided to focus on immediate content, news and sports, right? And the acquisition, their television network and their cable channels, the distribution means. They decided they were going to be out of the motion picture industry. That's neither, right or wrong. That was a choice that they made, what business they were going to pursue, what was going to be their business going forward into the future. Whereas other companies have chosen differently. Disney, as an example, has chosen to build as big a library of content as they can for the streaming service, right? They want to be able to provide all this content on demand for people. And they believe that they're going to be a competitor to Netflix. They're going to be a competitor. Look at all the companies that have started streaming services just in the last few years, right? And there are more coming online. Um, and there's going to be a shakeout. We're not going to have all these streaming services that you currently have into the future. So everybody wants to get that foothold right now. Right now, obviously, Netflix is the big 800-pound gorilla. But with companies like Amazon and companies like Disney and CBS and others getting into the game, who's going to be around in another 10 years? Nobody knows the answer to that. And there are people who love theaters, and there are other people who say theaters are dinosaurs and they won't be around much longer.
I'm insulted.
Yeah. Well, the reality is none of us know really what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
I think, people like the Spielbergs of the world would say that we need the movie experience. I don't care how good your home theater is, it'll never match what we can do in a movie theater. It's a different experience. But you've got people watching feature films on little smartphones.
Another person that I had interviewed is another professor from the telecommunications department named Mike Gerhardt. Although he was funny to meet, but he does know what my topic has to be talked about, and he was somehow against it, is what some people might think, but he knows. And I was so glad to meet him and interviewed him for this podcast.
Well, first, I wouldn't describe it necessarily as a monopoly. I'd say it's more of an oligopoly. Which a monopoly is when one company dominates, and I don't think there's one company, even the media field, although it's highly concentrated. There's not one company. There's actually about 6 to 10 companies that really dominate that whole landscape. So there is definitely concentration of ownership, and for some of us, that raises some serious questions. So what we have is an oligopoly of about 6 major media companies and a couple of tech giants that are really controlling most of the entertainment and the information that we get on a daily basis. And right now, the government doesn't seem to be in much of a mood to regulate or to break up these monopolies and this kind of concentration of ownership. In the past, in American history, there have been periods of time where the government has been very aggressive about breaking up companies that have gotten too big, no matter, across a whole bunch of different industries, from oil to steel to the telephone companies. So if it gets too concentrated, more concentrated, maybe the government will step in and take some action to curb this. I know you guys think that Disney, because Disney has acquired so much, because it's the largest media company, you think it's kind of a monopoly. Well, it's not really. It still has a handful of competitors out there in the marketplace. But if they control too much, that's not a healthy thing. What's kind of sad with the Disney-Fox merger is I hope they don't kill some of those Fox movie labels, because Fox is one of the oldest film studios. I would hate to see that brand completely die. But I don't know how Disney's going to do that long term. I don't know if they're going to keep that brand long term or not. Short term, they will. There's 3 Fox, I think, film labels that Disney uses. But no, it's not good because the concentration of ownership, because it limits competition, and it limits competition in the marketplace of ideas, which is the idea that we ought to have a big, robust discussion about everything going on in the world with a lot of different points of view. And when one or two kind of inherently kind of conservative companies controls most of the news and everything and the information and entertainment, there's a less of a chance that we have the kind of a free, open, robust marketplace of ideas. And not only that, it could have other impacts for consumers. They can raise prices. They can, stomp on the competitors. And these are all vertically integrated companies too, which means they have more power than ever before because they control not only production of content, but increasingly distribution. So Disney Plus is an example of that. Not only are they making movies, but now they want to control the streaming platform, right? Or they have ABC and ESPN, and then they have networks that they can use to distribute their content. So the government's allowing a lot of vertical and horizontal integration to happen right now. I think a pendulum will swing back eventually, but before Disney gets broken up, it's the tech companies that have the big targets on their backs right now that their regulators are going to go after. It's Google and Facebook and Amazon are the companies there. If the government takes action, they're going to go after those companies and break those companies up, I think, before the media companies.
So it's like a tech war.
Well, the tech companies have grown to be big, important players in the culture and the economy and the politics, and they become so big that I think that and they've proven that they've aren't necessarily committed to privacy, okay, and other important things that are in the interest of the consumer. So I think there's a good chance that the tech companies are going to be broken up long before the media giants, okay? So I think Google and Amazon will be and Facebook have a better chance of being broken up than Disney or, Warner Media or Viacom CBS or any of these other huge media companies. Now you can find a bunch of commentary online about, anti-Disney, or we think Disney's too big or controlling too much. And it seems like when they acquire Lucasfilm and Marvel and Pixar and Fox, it almost feels like they're controlling everything.
Or Hulu, for that matter. Like
they control most of Hulu now.
Right, and when I want to watch the Orville, and the Orville just announced that they're moving from Fox to Hulu, I kind of find that a problem because, I love the Orville because it's funny. It's a parody of Star Trek.
Star Trek, yeah.
Yeah.
Seth MacFarlane, yeah.
It's hard to accept.
Well, all the streaming thing is extreme competition is happening with a number of these big media companies launching streaming services, and it's causing two problems for consumers. One is subscription fatigue. Most people don't want to subscribe to more than 3 or 4 of these things, not 7 or 8 streaming services. And then consumer confusion. Where's my show going to end up? And who's going to carry my favorite show? And there's a lot of confusion about that right now. But I think after it all kind of shakes out, there'll be 2 or 3 companies, a little oligopoly that dominates the streaming world. It'll probably be Netflix and Disney and maybe HBO Max. I don't know.
I'll gather all the parts. So anyway, go ahead. What were you saying?
I was talking about the streaming wars right now, that it's leading to a lot of confusion and some fatigue, but it'll all shake out, and we'll probably end up with 2 or 3 companies like Netflix and Disney Plus that dominate that field as well. There's concentration of ownership, in almost every industry in America, because that's a byproduct of capital. The banks are high. There's a handful of banks that control all the wealth in this country. There's only a couple of car makers that make the cars. There's only a couple of media companies. That's kind of the way America tends to work, until it gets so bad that the government steps in to do something. And I don't think it's gotten to that point in the media companies yet, where they're going to reverse this. They've been very liberal and deregulated these companies to allow big ownership to happen. And Trump is not anti-business and anti-merger. And so I just don't think there's any political will right now to break up media. Big tech is a different story. I think they will face threats to be broken up. But I think, and big media is probably happy, because if all the attention is on Facebook and Google, that means nobody's coming after them and trying to break them up. So they're happy to have all that attention paid to, the giant data companies and the tech companies. They're happy to have that attention, so the regulators aren't coming after them. I think they'll be they'll probably be the dominant players, but they won't have 100% of the marketplace. There'll be a number of smaller companies. I wouldn't worry about one company own. The government will not allow one company to own all media. It will not happen. Okay, it might feel like it's happening now, but it would never get to that point. Believe me, the people would scream before they would allow one company to control all, or have way too much power. Okay, you might think right now Disney has way too much power, but.
And they want to create more, a bigger movie archive than they could ever possibly imagine.
Well, they need that for the streaming. But I think you guys maybe are overly concerned about the House of the Mouse. I mean, it is big and powerful, but it's not the only player, and it still has competition. And nothing's going to change unless the government steps in to break it up. And I just don't see there's will to do that right now. Like I said, the pressure's on Google, Facebook, Amazon, the tech giants. The pressure is not on the media companies right now. So I just don't see any big change in the near immediate future on ownership for media companies. Disney will probably get even bigger and stronger and even more powerful. I know about the history of the game of Monopoly, 1935, Parker Brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a Great Depression, and people hated big business and Wall Street, but they hated it, but they wanted to be it at the same time.
My take is that monopoly is a very interesting concept in economics. What it entails is a single producer that has a market. Now, that's a little different from what you might call an oligopoly, where there's 2 or 3 or maybe 4 dominant producers in a market. And that's in contrast to what we may call a perfectly competitive market, where there's literally hundreds of different people that are in the market that are selling things. And I don't know, I'm not an expert on entertainment economics per se. I sort of follow it roughly, like most people do, and I'm aware that there have been mergers. But it seems to me we want to think about what's being monopolized. Would it be entertainment per se? Is it news? What are we looking at here? I think that's an important thing to think about, what the market is. And I think if you look at entertainment, I can see how people would think that if big entertainment conglomerates come together and merge, boy, it looks like the world's getting monopolized. But the other thing we have to remember are the different outlets and forms that entertainment take. When movies were the only thing that were there, and that's the only way you got, video footage, you had 5 or 6 studios and they ran everything. Well, what came along? You had television. All of a sudden, television is now competition for the movies that are in the theaters. And if we see what's happened in the last 20 years, what do we have? We have the internet that is disrupting, shall I say, the standard three network market that I grew up with in the 1950s and 1960s. So it's kind of hard to say what the overall monopolization of entertainment is, since there's so many different media that we can get it from. That's true. A lot of them go cross platforms. You know, a lot of them will own a television station and also own a movie studio and all kinds of things like that. But it's not clear exactly how you measure that degree of monopolization. To me, at least as a casual consumer, what I see is there's a lot more choice in terms of content for entertainment than there was when I was a college student, which would have been 40 years ago. And there's no question of that. And so, in some sense, yeah, there could be some consolidation. And of course, we have robust antitrust laws, and there's a big question always, how do you enforce those laws? And again, that's not my area of expertise. Again, my take, and again, I think the thing that's relevant for your project is be very careful about thinking about what you mean by monopolization.
Uh,
Let's say, for example, today, there is, from the best I can tell, a monopoly on movies
yeah.
in the sense of if you want to go out and go to a movie, there's the AMC places and there's the
Yeah.
AMC places.
Yeah.
That's about it. I think there's a few independent ones. If you looked at it through the lens of 1935, you'd say, oh my goodness, look, the presentation of movies is being monopolized. Gee, this is a problem. But if you think about it, given the fact that there's home entertainment alternatives, we probably don't worry too much about AMC having a monopoly on the sit-down theaters because there's lots of other substitutes for that. You can download it online. You can get all kinds of things. The thing that gets me that I think is very interesting is there's so many more alternatives today. If you want to sit down and spend an evening watching a movie, think about the alternatives you have that are so much different than what you had, let's say, in 1969. 1969, you could go to a movie theater, and there may be two or three in town, or you could flip on the television station. There might be a movie on, okay, one of the three stations. So you had an option of about six at most, okay? Big cities may be a little better. But now, almost anywhere in the United States, at the flip of a switch, most of us have endless options. I don't know about you, but on my Netflix, I spend half my time figuring out what I want to watch on Netflix compared to actually watching anything.
Right.
I think it's interesting you raise that, Ben, because presumably any business firm in any market would like to be in a position where they dominate the market and they get the monopoly, if the monopoly is big enough and lucrative enough. But sometimes what happens is monopolies emerge in markets because the market shrunk. For an example, to the best of my knowledge, there's only one company that makes canning lids for canning jars for home canning, and that's Jarden. And they bought out the Ball brand, and they make all those. Okay, now 100 years ago or 70 years ago, there were a number of different companies that did that. But what happened is the market shrunk. You ended up the market's only viable to support one, so you do get this monopoly. Is it particularly lucrative? Probably not. Does it make a normal return? Probably does all right. But I think with media, you've got something completely different because that's an ever expanding market. People are always going to want to be entertained, and there's always new people that want to be entertained. And entertainment becomes, the platforms become international. I mean, how is it that today I know about a new film that's coming out in India? Well, it's because by Facebook, I have friends that are in that part of the world, and they've alerted me to this, which is very interesting. And again, would one firm be able to dominate the entire media? I find that to be, usually that doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in other industries. There's few industries that become monopolized that way. And especially if you start thinking about the theories of the economist Joseph Schumpeter, who made the point that what happens in a market economy, what happens especially in a modern economy, is you'll have absolutely new things emerge. For an example, television emerged and it looked like it was going to knock out theaters. Well, it didn't. And then what did you have? The internet looks like it's going to knock out standard television. But these are these radical revolutions that nobody quite foresees, nor does anybody completely understand how it operates. And what emerges from that are things that are unexpected and can't be anticipated. That's why the linear thinking of thinking everything's going to come together into one monopoly usually doesn't work out, because what you end up getting is there'll be a new technology that makes the monopoly redundant. It doesn't matter so much. So, if, for an example, Microsoft had a monopoly on word processing,
Hmm.
that's fine. All kinds of other things came out. Yeah. And this is part of what you end up getting. I mean, we used to worry when I was in college about the television. You only have three. You only have three television stations.
Yep.
My gosh, look at it now. There's hundreds of different things on the internet that give people information.
Hmm.
So in some sense, there's more. Now we worry about there's too much information, and nobody can logically put it together and make it work. You know.
Right.
So again, I think it's a very interesting market, and I would say I encourage you to sort of look at this and see how consolidation's happening, and tell us an interesting story. But just be careful about the narrative that says, "Oh, it's all going to come into one monster that controls everything."
Oh no, I'm not trying to look
Yeah,
for that.
yeah,
And if
and that's what you want to look out for. Make sure that you don't see that. I mean, we've heard that about Walmart. Walmart was supposed to be the thing that would end up dominating everything in groceries. Well, what
Yeah.
comes along but Amazon? You know.
Yeah. Amazon, eBay.
Yeah. There's always a boogeyman out there that looks like they're going to be the big one that monopolizes the market, but usually after the fact, we find something else happen. And it's very interesting to see how these things emerge. And there's always been seems to me, a tendency on part of Americans, probably rightfully so, to be suspicious of anything that's really big. A big company, a big union, a big government, all those things. That's sort of a natural thing we have. And that, in my opinion, is probably healthy, because it allows us to have scrutiny to things, and that's good. I mean, it's fascinating to me how all the grocery chains are now going back to something that was really old school, home delivery. I mean, that died out, except in the big cities, but now it's coming back because of Amazon. And again, something will come after that. The problem we have is, from the vantage point of 2019, we really don't know what 2025 is going to look like. But I guarantee you, in 1980, we didn't know what 1985 was going to look like either. Nobody knew this guy, Bill Gates, that started this little company, 1980. In 1980, the concern was, oh, IBM's going to monopolize everything in computers. And of
Especially
course,
Apple.
yeah, yeah. And the statement at IBM in the 1980s, as I recall, was, oh, the personal computer, that's a fad. You'll sell
Yeah.
20 of them to eccentrics, but otherwise it's going nowhere.
Yeah.
So again, no one can completely conceptualize the entire economy. That's one thing I've learned trying to conceptualize the entire economy for 40 years is that nobody can do that. And there's always unexpected things that emerge that cannot be foreseen. And they usually are things that respond to what look like concentrated trends. So I'll be interested to see how that all works out. All I know is I'm much happier on Friday night when I've got more choices now than when I had fewer. I think most people are too. And you guys have grown up with it, so you don't know much else, but that's part of what you got.
What is this person trying to say when this person tried to create the Monopoly game board?
Boy, you probably know more about the history of it. As I understand, it was a depression game. It came out in the 1930s. And as I understand, it was a man that was unemployed, and he kind of figured this out as a way for people to pass their time. You end up buying things up, and then presumably, once you get more wealth, you have an advantage because the other players are having to pay you every time they land on your property. And so you get their wealth, and then eventually it comes down to one player. And it's an interesting game. I don't know if anybody's ever done the economics of Monopoly. How
Mhm.
much does that really correspond to what happens in the real world? I think it's very interesting, though, because there is a flavor of that game uh, out there with any group that's trying to acquire assets.
Mhm.
That's the case. Sure, you find all kinds of companies that will acquire one set of assets and then develop those and then get rid of them and buy other sets of companies. That's very common. A lot of developers do those kinds of things. Some of them go across particular boundaries. Like, for example, here's an interesting point. All the old Ball brands are no longer
Mhm.
owned by Ball Corporation.
Mhm.
They're owned by a corporation that preceded that called Jarden. And then Jarden got preceded by a new company called Newell. And what Newell constitutes is a company that owns, I think, about 40 or 50 different brands, everything from Coleman lanterns to ball jars. But what they found in the last few years, and their stock's been down a lot, is that they couldn't manage all that. And then what they're always having to do is, if you're buying and selling brand names, what keeps the knockoffs from coming in, the imitations from coming in, the low cost substitutes for your brand name? And they've had all kinds of problems there. Again, I don't follow. I own some Newell stock because, like a lot of people around here, we owned some ball stock at one time, and that all got split up into one thing. So I follow it a little bit, and as an economist, I'm interested in a company like that that owns a lot of different things and how it operates. But it hadn't been a cakewalk for them. I'll say that. Yeah. And it looks like, I mean, they would be exactly what you're thinking about, Ben. They're exactly the kind of company, it's like on a monopoly board. They're searching around trying to find things, and they'll buy it up and they'll put it in the portfolio and they'll try to make it work efficiently. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So the monopoly game, I don't think is an exact correspondence to the world, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, they, if people like, let's just say if there's little kids, like if I ask them or try to teach them what is the term of Monopoly, they'll
Uh,
say, "Oh, it's a board game."
Yeah, yeah, right. What's interesting, I mean, we think about this, and this is sort of interesting because you can imagine a Monopoly game that's dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say the board starts changing as you
Yeah.
continue in the game and new markets emerge. That would be an interesting thing to try to develop. And of course, a lot of the online games, I know, you buy things, you sell things, you do work, and you acquire things. It's very interesting. The economic algorithms there are interesting because in the whole gaming community, you'll have prices for particular products depending upon what supply demand algorithms are. So it's out there. You can, in some sense, mimic an economy in the confines of a game, and so there's nothing wrong with that. That's kind of an interest. That's very interesting stuff.
Of course, from learning all this, when it comes to power, when firms have such power, they have charged prices that are higher than can be justified based upon the cost of production prices that are higher than they would be if the market was more competitive. With higher prices, consumers will demand less quantity, and hence the quantity produced and consumed will be lower than it will be under a competitive market structure. Let's see. The bottom line is that when companies have a monopoly, prices are too high and production is too low. There's an ineffective allocation of resources. In addition, the tactics used to establish monopoly power, such as driving competitors out of business or thwarting potential inheritance, can also cause considerable harm to households who own the business that are forced to close their doors. So, probably in theory, this problem should solve itself as technology and consumer preference change. Yet it hasn't happened. But Axios, another news article reading system, outlined the problem in a recent article on farm bankruptcies. Across industries, the United States became a country of monopolies. So in terms in Hollywood, we could all know that right now there are 5 big companies, such as Comcast. They own NBC Universal, meaning they own Universal Studios, they own NBC News, they own Focus, DreamWorks Animation, while AT&T Corporation owns Warner Media, DirecTV, Cartoon Network, HBO, HLN, CNN, the Turner Warner Media TV stations, and of course the movie studio Warner Brothers Pictures. They even also own DC Comics and New Line Cinema, with, we all know, AT&T being a phone company. And for the Walt Disney Company, not only now they own the Fox Entertainment Group, which owns 20th Century Fox or some Fox Entertainment channels or Blue Sky Studios owned by Fox, but they were known to own ESPN, ABC television network, and having their own movie studio, the Walt Disney Pictures, Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilms, and Touchstone. Of course, they created some toys or their own theme parks. And with Viacom, we imagine them as another media company that owns Paramount Pictures, VH1, and they merged with CBS Corporation, which they own the news station of CBS, Showtime, and Pop, which they are cable networks. And since Disney bought only the entertainment group of Fox, which is 20th Century Fox, but the Fox News channels like Fox News or the Fox Sports coverage is still owned by Rupert Murdoch with his new company called Fox Corporation. And yet, now, as we imagine what this Monopoly game is, your players are the big five media corporations, while your properties are the movie studios, the TV networks, the publishers, on what you imagine this will be. All I know is, for a better solution to solve, my guess is we must notify our government to regulate or tell laws on what they can solve the economic trouble from this, or tell them what they can own or what they cannot own without express permission, unless they have extreme good reasons. But still, even as a kid, I enjoyed a lot of their movies, and I still take film as an art form. As a telecommunications student, I would simply suggest look for the art form. Ignore the emergers on what they were going through. And avoid one media corporation to rule them all. So thank you. And if you want more information, you could comment on my YouTube channel for more questions, and I could try to answer as best as I can. Thank you, and you have a nice time. Hope you enjoy.